Davide here, and welcome back to my channel, The Impertinent Collector, where every video is a journey. And this video is no different, except that this video is a tale of a real journey. A journey full of risks and opportunities. A journey of love and drama. A family journey, but also a journey of separation. Stick around and don't forget to always leave me a comment, like and subscribe this unique content that I create for you every week, week after week, week after week. Now, in the last few months, I moved in one of the leafy suburban areas around the inner city of Sydney and in Australia. And whilst I was walking in one of these lovely avenues with great villa and old properties, my old dog, Minnie, beloved dog that has been with me for 15 years, and that she's now slow and slow and slower, I came across this old gentleman that was pruning some roses in the portion of his garden that was facing the main street when I was walking Minnie. And because that particular suburb is an area that historically was populated by immigrants coming from Greece, Portugal and Italy, I had an hint that the gentleman might be Italian. And so I made an initial remark, how wonderful that you can look after your garden. And he replied to me, oh, I've been doing it for many years now. And then I'll ask him, are you Italian? And he said like, yes, of course. And the conversation immediately switched to Italian. At that point, a nice lady in what appeared to me the late 70s appeared from the inside the house, hearing us talking Italian, and she introduced herself. And so here is the couple, husband and wife, Lucio and Marianna. And Marianna asked me, do you know how old is Lucio? I said, to be honest, I didn't have the guts to ask him. And she said to me, she's 84 years old. I say like, my God, it's extraordinary. And he's still minding his own garden. Both of them were laughing at me. And she said, no, he's not 84 years old. He's 94 years old. As you would expect, I was gobsmacked by this revelation that this nice couple, you know, they were already in the 90s. And so I kept the conversation going with great pleasure of my dog, who could then rest and sit down, divided by this little fence that separated him and his roses from me and the dog on the streets. And I asked Lucio, how long have you been here in Australia? And here is the story of Lucio and Marianna. Lucio moved to Australia in 1950, 74 years ago. And in this perilous journey on one of these big boats that were like transporting troops during World War II that just ended 4 years, 5 years earlier, all crammed, there were hundreds and hundreds of immigrants. In his case, he was coming from northern Italy, and he boarded the ship in Genoa, in Liguria, and he took all the route down the Mediterranean. They went through the Suez Canal, and then India, and then finally arrived in Sydney after a 64 days journey on these repurposed transport military ships. An incredible journey. And so I'll ask him, but what prompted you to come to Australia from Italy in the 1950s? And Lucio said, oh, we have always been very, very poor. We all been peasant, working the land for the landlord. So very long hours, very tough. And then I had an older brother, and my older brother died during the war. And I had a cousin that during the war was working in the mine in Germany. And so as soon as the war ended and he was sent back home, he found out about this opportunity of moving to Australia in the most remote part of New South Wales, where they were actually building tunnels for the trains and for the road using explosive. And this guy happened to be an expert on explosive, but that was Lucio's cousin. And Lucio's cousin kept in touch. And so the family of Lucio was happy to let him go to Australia to seek a better life, a better future. And Lucio's cousin told Lucio what to write in the letter, pretending that he knew exactly what he was doing, because these people were very much in demand in Australia. And so Lucio took the boat. He traveled by train from Trieste on the northeast of Italy all the way to Genoa. And to Genoa he boarded this boat, and extraordinary as it might seem, they exchanged letters letting his cousin know when he would arrive, and his cousin promised to pick him up at the dock when the ship was supposed to arrive. And one of the things that I asked Lucio, I said like, oh, how did your parents felt, you know, when you had to go, when you decided to go? He said they were happy, because those were the years right after the war where the northeastern border of Italy was considered at risk of an invasion from the Red Army and the army of the Yugoslavia's leader Titus. So life was very unsafe and full of uncertainty. His family were poor. His brother had already died during the war. So for his parents, the possibility of having his son safely placed in another country around the world sounded like a blessing. And a blessing it was. Except that life never works out the way one would expect. And so when poor Lucio, after 64 days, arrived in Sydney, his cousin was nowhere to be seen. In fact, the previous night there's been like a massive storm near the construction site and the roads were cut off. The cousin couldn't pick him up. And there he was, Lucio, with his big bag that his mom had prepared for him. And so, as the conversation progressed, I'll ask him, what did you put in that suitcase? And Lucio said, I never traveled anywhere all my life. And so my mom worked out what had to go inside the suitcase. And so what was in the suitcase was a pair of nice shoes and 2 suits, one for summer and one for winter to go to church, and a couple of pairs of underwears. And that was it, the clothes that he had with him during these 64 journeys by boat, by ship, from Genoa to Sydney in 1950. The interesting aspect of this story is that he had made friendship with another Italian from another region who was also joining his brother, but his brother was living and working in Sydney since 1946. And when at the end of the journey they left each other, he realized that the pickup for Lucio wasn't there. And he had the intuition, 10 hours later, to go back to the dock and check if Lucio was still there. And Lucio was still there with his suitcase, without speaking a single word of English. Nobody else was there. He had never traveled overseas. He has been at sea for 64 days. And this nice fellow, he says, don't worry about it. I'll host you for the night whilst we contact your cousin. And as he went to this new friend house in Sydney, there was a sister. And the sister was no other than the Mariana that Lucio would marry few years later. And so I asked Lucio, how was the life, in this construction site in 1950s, when eventually the cousin picked him up and took him in this God-forbidden place. He said to me, it was the best things that ever happened to me. Yes, because we have suffered from starvation during the war, because everything that the farm was producing was constantly confiscated by the Germans that by them had invaded the northern Italy. And so we suffer hunger through the end of the war. And before leaving, they destroyed all the fields. So for a few years, there was a big shortage of food. And there instead, there was plenty of food. They even set up a camp when we all had nice beds. They had set up some schools to teach basic English to all these new immigrants that were coming in. And they were giving them some basic training on how to use the tools and how to follow the instruction. They even set up an hospital attached to the compound. Yes, because every day you have 1 or 2 people who would die because the vault of the tunnel would collapse, because Australia is famous for this very, very hard rock that even the most sophisticated boring machine these days, when they have to build a new tunnel for a new train line, struggle to cut. So all the diamond heads get destroyed very, very quickly, you know, at a rate that is much, much faster than in other countries, because you got this very, very strong granite that is underneath the surface across Australia, certainly in New South Wales. So many people died, but Lucio was getting paid according to him. Not only was getting paid every week, the money was deposited in the bank account. He was getting paid very good money, and all accommodation, all the services were provided for him. So much so that our hero Lucio worked in this site continuously for 12 years, ranking up on the management of this operation. And so, with the money that he was saving every week, he was able to help his family in Italy. And not only that, at some point, he was able to save enough money to buy the family in Italy a house for the first time in many, many generations. His parents that were just farmers and peasants on somebody else's land, they were home owners. And the pride of Lucio when he told me the story. And so after 12 years, he then decided to come down to Sydney and to settle down. And that's 1962. That's where he bought the house where I met him with my dog, Minnie. I met Lucio and Mariana. And so, what an incredible story of risk-taking and gambling and seeking opportunities. This is what makes Australia great. But guess what? This is also what makes many countries around the world great. To the point that I've been blessed to be born in a Western country, in a European country, from a very good family. I was extremely lucky and privileged, healthy. So for me, the risk of coming to Australia was extremely limited as a risk. If it didn't work out, I would be able to go back. But all the reason why I'm saying this is because if you are black from Africa, if you are South American, if you are Ukrainian, if you are Chinese, or if you are from Indonesia or the Philippines, and you are escaping persecution, you are escaping war, or you simply want a better future for yourself and your family, I feel you. I'm one of you, and I love you. And so, in this conversation with Lucio, I'll ask him, how did you meet your wife? He says, with her, with Mariana, in all these years, 12 years when I was working there, I kept in touch and I'd never seen her again. In those 12 years, he arrived in Sydney, he spent the night with Mariana's brother, then he went to, you know, the remote area where the construction site was, and he basically lived there for 12 years, but he kept in touch with Mariana. Mariana waited for him. And when eventually decided to come back, Mariana was there for him. And he was a wealthy man. He had all this money. He had bought a house for his parents in Italy. And he was then able to buy a nice property for himself in Sydney. And that is where I met him. And in this story, I remember when I told my parents that after 10 years in London, I was bored and I was looking for new opportunities. And I saw that Australia would be a country where I could do well. My dad's reaction was, wow, such a faraway country. But my mom was like, oh, that's fantastic. As soon as you settle down, we come for what my mom to this day still called a viaggetto, a little voyage of 24 hours in the air, coming to visit me like I can't escape them, even if I am in the midst of the thick vegetation of Australia. My mom will come and see me. And they did come 4 times. Incredible. And so when the time came for me to leave and come to Australia, my dad, like he would always do, delegated my mom to buy me a gift from him that would be somehow meaningful. And my mom, as always resourceful, she said, I have the perfect gift for our son. I have a book, but not any book. This is the book in question. This ancient book, old book, happened to be a book called Moral Instruction from a Father to his Son that is leaving for a long journey, or otherwise, the way to shape the character of a young man towards the strengths that virtue brings. And on top of that, there are 100 statements, proverbs from Christianity and moral as well, statements accumulated through the years. And this wonderful little book that you can see here, that is written in French, archaic French, was printed in Paris in 1680. So that makes him 340 years ago, which makes my journey ridiculous. The journey of Lucio and Mariana an easy trip, because there were people who were already leaving everything behind to take immense risks. Some were explorers, some were scientists, some were people who were deported, very much like the convicts that would populate early Australia. And some were people that in different conditions were looking for a better future. And so, in my conversation with Lucio, I'll ask him, Lucio, when is the last time you went back to Italy, now that is 94? And he said to me, I only went back once. In 74 years, Lucio went back to Italy only once. And everything has to be arrived. He flew back. When he arrived in Milan, he called his dad. His mom has passed away years earlier. And when he finally arrived at home, the home that he had never seen in person, that he had bought for his parents, he find few relatives that he haven't seen for 30 years. We are talking about the 1980s now. He saw some people from the local village, a doctor and a priest, who told him that his father had just passed away few years early. But the beauty of this story is that both the priest and the doctor said, your dad has been sick for many years and he never wanted to tell you. And he was so excited to be able to finally see you that when you called him from Milan, that you were just 2-3 hours away, he died out of happiness. Oh, how wonderful! Considering that I'm going back to Italy towards July to see my old mom. And no, I don't expect her to die and neither to be particularly happy apart from the first half an hour. Then we will argue on something futile, as we always do. But this is the story of the travelers like myself, like Lucio, like the thousands and thousands of people that they're seeking a better future. And let me tell you, it wasn't easy for me in Australia. I thought it would be easy. But the hardest aspect of me moving to Australia was the fact that I was treated as an immigrant. Like everybody else, I had to go through the immigration process. And so I was no longer a privileged European who thought that all doors would open for him automatically. And if it was hard for me, and hard it was before, during, and after dealing with immigration, how hard must be for all these people that might be asylum seekers, that might be fleeing extreme poverty. And so my heart goes out for them. They are my brothers. And this is my book. And towards the end, when you have one of these proverbs to do with Christianity and morality, one of them says, a bad habit is like feeding a snake that sooner or later will bite you back. Oh my God! Thank you, Papa. Ciao.